Welcome to History Teller YT, the channel where the past comes alive. Today, we journey back over 2 millennia to witness one of history's most epic struggles, the Punic Wars, the titanic clash between Rome and Carthage. From the daring march of Hannibal across the Alps, to naval battles that reshaped the Mediterranean, and the rise of Rome as an unstoppable superpower, this story has it all: strategy, courage, betrayal, and ambition. Imagine cities trembling under siege, legions maneuvering with precision, and leaders making choices that would echo through centuries. In this series, we'll explore every facet: the relentless battles, the brilliant tactics, the political intrigue, the cultural transformations, and the lasting legacy of Rome's rise. By the end of this journey, you'll understand not only how Rome conquered its greatest rival, but how the Punic Wars shaped the world we know today. So, sit back, open your mind to the past, and get ready to experience the epic story of Rome and Carthage like never before. Trust me, you'll want to hear every moment of this history. In the early centuries before the birth of Christ, the Italian peninsula was home to many tribes and kingdoms. But one city was rising faster than anyone expected: Rome. What started as a small settlement along the banks of the Tiber River had grown into a fierce republic. Its people were disciplined, driven by honor, loyalty, and a deep belief in the greatness of their state. Rome was not satisfied being just another city; it wanted to shape the world around it. Rome's greatest strength wasn't just its soldiers, it was the system behind them. Roman citizens believed that serving the army was a sacred duty. Their armies were organized into legions, disciplined groups trained to fight in perfect formation. Every victory brought them new lands, new wealth, and new allies. The Roman Senate, formed by powerful and influential men, guided the expansion of the Republic, always looking for the next opportunity to grow. But Rome had a problem: growth always creates enemies. The Italian peninsula was filled with rivals who feared Rome's rise. Rome battled Etruscans, Samnites, and Greek colonies, defeating them one by one. With every victory, Rome became stronger, smarter, and more confident. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome controlled most of Italy. Roads, trade networks, and alliances all connected back to the powerful heart, the city of Rome. Yet, even with all its success, the Roman Republic felt something was missing. Wealthy and full of pride, Rome wanted to expand beyond its shores. The Mediterranean Sea was the highway of trade and power; whoever ruled the sea ruled the future. And there, across the water, stood another great power. A superpower built not on land armies, but on ships and commerce. That powerful rival was Carthage, rising like a jewel of the Western Sea, rich, influential, and determined to protect its dominance. The world was watching 2 growing giants, and soon, both would collide in a war that would shake history forever. Carthage was not born in Italy. It was a wealthy Phoenician colony on the North African coast, near modern-day Tunisia. The Phoenicians were legendary sailors, known for exploration and skill in trade. Carthage inherited all of that maritime brilliance and pushed it further. By the 3rd century BCE, Carthage was the richest city in the western Mediterranean. Its harbors were filled with ships carrying gold, silver, ivory, spices, wines, and countless other luxuries. The sea was their empire. Unlike Rome, Carthage did not rely mainly on citizen soldiers. Instead, it hired trained warriors from different lands: Numidians from Africa, Iberians from Spain, Gauls from France, and skilled slingers from the Balearic Islands. Carthage combined the best fighters from multiple cultures into one powerful force. Their navy, equipped with fast and deadly warships, made them nearly untouchable at sea. Government power in Carthage belonged to wealthy merchant families who protected their business interests above all. They were practical, strategic, and always prepared to invest heavily in whatever brought them profit and dominance. Carthage also controlled major territories including large parts of Spain, North Africa, and Mediterranean islands. However, this strength was also a weakness. Carthage's empire existed to serve commerce, not national unity. Money held them together more than loyalty. And as Rome became stronger each year, Carthage sensed a dangerous threat approaching. For decades, both nations grew without conflict, eyeing each other's progress. Rome dominated the land. Carthage dominated the sea. The Mediterranean wasn't big enough for two ambitious superpowers. Every trade route, every island, and every ally became a reason for suspicion. Two giants were expanding toward the same goal, control of the Mediterranean. At the center of this growing tension lay Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean, located like a stepping stone between Italy and Africa. Sicily was rich in farmland, bustling with cities, and perfectly placed for military control of sea routes. It was a prize that both Rome and Carthage desperately wanted but neither fully controlled. For years, Sicily was home to Greek city-states, fighting continuous battles against Carthage. The western part of the island was under Carthaginian influence, while the eastern cities leaned toward Greek alliances. Rome wasn't directly involved, not yet. But history rarely stays quiet for long. The spark came from a small but dangerous event involving a group of mercenaries known as the Mamertines. They captured the city of Messana and soon found themselves attacked by Syracuse, the powerful Greek city of Sicily. Out of desperation, they called for help, first from Carthage, then from Rome. This single request forced Rome to make a decision that would change the world. Would they step into Sicilian politics and challenge Carthage's authority? The Roman Senate debated fiercely. Some politicians argued that Rome should stay within the Italian peninsula. Others believed that if Rome didn't expand now, Carthage would soon surround them and block their future. Finally, Rome agreed to help. They sent legions into Sicily, marking the first time in history Rome crossed the sea to fight a foreign empire. Carthage felt betrayed. They had arrived to help first, and now Rome was pushing them aside. Diplomacy died that day. War began. This moment triggered the first of three legendary conflicts. The Punic Wars, named from Punic, the Latin word for the Phoenicians of Carthage. A showdown that would last more than a century, reshape empires, and define the future of Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean world. Rome and Carthage were officially enemies. And the world would never be the same again. The year was 264 BCE. The air over the Mediterranean shimmered with tension. Rome, a land-based power that had never fought a major naval war, now found itself standing face to face with Carthage, the undisputed master of the sea. Neither side truly understood what they were about to unleash. Both nations believed in their destiny to rule, and both refused to back down. When Roman legions first landed in Sicily, it was a bold move. They marched with confidence, facing Carthaginian troops stationed near Messana. For the first time, Roman soldiers were fighting on foreign soil. Rome had built its legacy on the land, disciplined formations, powerful infantry, and an unbreakable will. But in Sicily, the terrain and tactics were different. Carthage had long experience in island warfare and relied heavily on mercenaries and ships. The Carthaginian army struck first. They surrounded Messana, determined to crush the Roman presence before it spread. Yet the Roman legions, with their heavy shields and unmatched discipline, fought fiercely. In a series of intense clashes, they drove Carthage's forces back. Town after town began to fall to Rome. The Carthaginian commanders were stunned, Rome was supposed to be a landlocked power. But the Republic was proving that determination could overcome experience. Still, Carthage had a weapon that Rome did not, its navy. The sea lanes around Sicily were filled with Carthaginian warships, sleek and fast, cutting through the waves like sharks. These ships could blockade ports, cut supply lines, and attack from the coast at will. Rome realized that as long as Carthage ruled the waters, true victory would be impossible. The Senate debated day and night, and finally, a radical idea emerged: Rome would build a navy from scratch. It sounded insane. The Romans had no shipbuilding tradition, no sailors, and no admirals. But Rome had something even more powerful: discipline and learning speed. They captured a wrecked Carthaginian warship that had washed ashore and used it as a model. Within 2 months, Roman engineers constructed a fleet of over 100 ships. For training, soldiers practiced rowing on land, sitting in rows while instructors beat time with sticks. The First Punic War was no longer a local conflict. It had become a full-scale struggle for Mediterranean dominance. The stage was set for one of the most surprising naval transformations in history. Rome was about to challenge the very masters of the sea on their own domain. The newly built Roman fleet was unlike anything the world had seen. The Romans understood they couldn't match Carthage in naval maneuvering, so they turned to their greatest strength: infantry tactics. If they could turn sea battles into land battles on floating platforms, they might stand a chance. That idea gave birth to one of Rome's most famous inventions, the corvus, or raven. The corvus was a large boarding bridge with a metal spike underneath. When a Roman ship came close to an enemy vessel, the bridge would slam down onto the enemy deck, the spike locking the ships together. Roman soldiers would then charge across and fight hand-to-hand, just as they did on land. This brutal and direct tactic turned naval warfare into a soldier's fight, something the Romans excelled at. When the fleets finally met off the coast of Mylae in 260 BCE, the world watched with awe. Carthage expected an easy victory. Their admirals mocked the inexperienced Romans, calling them farmers who had wandered too far from home. But as the battle began, those farmers unleashed a storm. Roman ships crashed forward, bridges slammed down, and legions poured onto Carthaginian decks. The fighting was savage and bloody, but by the end of the day, the sea belonged to Rome. The victory at Mylae was more than a military success, it was a psychological earthquake. For the first time, Carthage realized that Rome was not just a land empire, it could become a naval superpower too. The Roman Senate celebrated for days, and their confidence soared. They expanded their fleet, recruited more sailors, and began taking control of key Sicilian ports. However, victory came at a cost. The new Roman navy was powerful but fragile. Storms destroyed many of their ships, and thousands of sailors drowned in the deep. Still, the Romans rebuilt, again and again. Every disaster became a lesson, every loss a reason to fight harder. Their discipline was unmatched, and their determination terrifying. Meanwhile, Carthage refused to surrender. The merchant city poured money into new ships and hired more mercenaries from Spain, Gaul, and Africa. What began as a regional conflict was now spreading across the entire western Mediterranean. The two greatest powers of the age were locked in a war of endurance, one fought with swords, oars, and unbreakable will. Years passed. Sicily, once a peaceful island of trade and culture, became a battlefield soaked in blood. Towns changed hands again and again. Armies clashed across mountains, coasts, and farmlands. The people of Sicily paid the heaviest price, their homes destroyed, their fields burned, their families scattered between two empires. Rome continued to push forward, learning and adapting with every campaign. They fortified key strongholds like Agrigentum, a strategic city that became the site of one of the earliest and most brutal sieges. The Romans surrounded the city, cutting off supplies. Inside, the Carthaginian defenders suffered from hunger and disease. When reinforcements tried to break through, the Roman legions met them head-on. After months of fighting, the city fell. The victory was costly but glorious. Rome had proven it could fight and win far from home. Carthage struck back with naval raids and mercenary attacks. They destroyed Roman supply lines and burned coastal villages. The Romans responded with relentless counterattacks, rebuilding their fleets after every loss. For 23 long years, the war raged, the longest conflict the ancient world had ever seen up to that time. By 241 BCE, both sides were exhausted. Carthage's treasury was nearly empty. Its mercenaries were restless and unpaid. Rome, despite winning many battles, was bleeding resources too. But Rome had one last push left. A new Roman fleet, funded by private citizens who believed in victory, sailed into battle near the Aegates Islands. The fight was fierce, and this time, Rome's tactics and experience triumphed. The Carthaginian navy was crushed. Carthage sued for peace. Under the harsh terms of the treaty, they surrendered Sicily to Rome and paid a massive indemnity. Rome, once a regional power, now ruled its first overseas province. The First Punic War was over, but peace would not last. In the streets of Carthage, bitterness festered. Among those who watched their homeland humiliated was a young boy named Hannibal Barca, son of the famous Carthaginian general Hamilcar. His father made him swear an oath before the gods, that he would never rest until he had taken revenge on Rome. And that oath would one day set the world on fire. After the crushing defeat of the First Punic War in 241 BCE, Carthage was wounded but not destroyed. The once great maritime empire had lost Sicily and much of its wealth, yet its spirit was still alive, burning quietly under the ashes of humiliation. The Carthaginian people were proud and resilient, but the bitterness of defeat had cut deep. Rome had not only taken their island but also their pride. Still, Carthage was determined to rise again. The man leading this resurgence was Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant general who refused to surrender to despair. Hamilcar was a soldier of fierce will and unmatched vision. He believed that Carthage's future no longer lay in Sicily or the sea but across the water, in the rich lands of Iberia, modern-day Spain. Spain was filled with gold and silver mines, fertile valleys, and strong native tribes ready to fight for those who paid well. Hamilcar saw an opportunity. If Carthage could build a new empire in Spain, it could restore its strength and one day strike back at Rome. So, Hamilcar led an army to Iberia. With diplomacy, trade, and warfare, he began building a new Carthaginian power base. He treated local tribes not merely as subjects but as partners, winning their loyalty through gifts, respect, and shared victories. Slowly, the Carthaginian banners rose again over new cities and ports. The wealth from Spanish silver mines began to flow back to Carthage, funding its recovery. But while Carthage grew strong in the west, Rome was watching carefully. The Senate was uneasy. They knew Carthage still nursed the wound of defeat and feared it might one day seek vengeance. Still, Rome was busy expanding north into Gaul and east into the Adriatic. For a time, both powers avoided direct conflict. Then, fate turned its gaze upon a young boy who would change the world, Hannibal Barca, the son of Hamilcar. He grew up surrounded by soldiers, camps, and tales of Roman cruelty. To Hannibal, Rome was not just an enemy, it was a curse. One legend says that when Hannibal was only 9 years old, his father led him to the altar of Baal and made him swear a sacred oath, never to be a friend of Rome. The young boy swore it with all his heart. That oath would echo through history. As Hannibal grew into manhood, he absorbed everything the ancient world could teach about war. His mind was sharp, his memory incredible, and his instincts unmatched. Under the mentorship of his father and later his brother-in-law Hasdrubal, Hannibal learned to command men, study terrain, and turn every situation to his advantage. In the rugged mountains and dusty plains of Spain, he trained with Iberian warriors, Numidian horsemen, and Balearic slingers, soldiers from every corner of the Carthaginian world. Hannibal's charm was legendary. He could inspire loyalty among men who barely spoke his language. To his troops, he was not just a general, he was a comrade who shared their hardships. He ate what they ate, slept where they slept, and fought beside them when the enemy drew near. His presence in battle was magnetic, his courage infectious. Even his enemies would later admit that they had never faced a commander quite like him. When Hamilcar died in battle around 229 BCE, leadership passed to Hasdrubal the Fair. Hasdrubal continued to expand Carthaginian influence in Spain through diplomacy, establishing the great city of Carthago Nova, New Carthage, as the capital of their Iberian Empire. For years, Carthage and Rome coexisted under an uneasy peace, with one key agreement: Carthage would not cross north of the river Ebro in Spain. But fate struck again. Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BCE, and the army, without hesitation, proclaimed Hannibal Barca as their new commander at just 26 years old. The soldiers' confidence in him was absolute. They had seen his brilliance, his courage, and his burning hatred for Rome. Hannibal wasted no time. He reorganized his forces, tightened alliances, and expanded his territory. Soon, the powerful Spanish city of Saguntum, located south of the Ebro but allied with Rome, became the center of tension. The Romans warned Hannibal not to attack, reminding him of the treaty. But Hannibal had made his decision long ago. To him, Saguntum represented not just a city, but a symbol of Roman interference, a test of will between two empires. When Hannibal's army surrounded Saguntum and laid siege to it for months, the message was clear: war was coming again. The fall of Saguntum in 219 BCE was a thunderclap heard across the ancient world. The Romans were furious. To them, Hannibal had broken the peace, betrayed the treaty, and insulted their authority. The Senate demanded that Carthage hand him over. Carthage refused. Their pride would not allow them to surrender the man who had just restored their military glory. Thus, war was declared once more, the Second Punic War, destined to be one of the most dramatic conflicts in human history. Rome expected to fight another slow, predictable campaign like the First Punic War. They prepared to send armies to Spain and fleets to North Africa. But Hannibal had something entirely different in mind, a plan so daring it defied logic. He would not wait for Rome to come to him. Instead, he would bring the war to the gates of Rome itself. In the spring of 218 BCE, Hannibal gathered an army of nearly 90,000 soldiers, 12,000 horsemen, and dozens of African war elephants. His goal: march from Spain, across Gaul, over the towering Alps mountains, and invade Italy from the north, a route no army had ever taken before. It was madness, but it was also genius. If he succeeded, he would strike fear deep into the Roman heartland. As his army began its legendary march, they faced countless dangers. Harsh weather, deadly rivers, and attacks from hostile tribes tested their endurance at every step. Many soldiers and animals perished in the freezing heights of the Alps. But Hannibal never gave up. His determination burned like fire. He encouraged his men, promising them riches, glory, and revenge against the hated Romans. When his surviving army finally descended into the fertile plains of Italy, they were battered, exhausted, but alive. Against all odds, Hannibal had achieved the impossible. Rome had no idea what awaited them. The shadow of Carthage had crossed the mountains. The greatest military mind of the ancient world had arrived on Italian soil, ready to strike terror into the heart of the Republic. The Second Punic War had truly begun, and Rome would never be the same again. The year was 218 BCE. Winter's breath howled across the Alps as Hannibal Barca stood before the greatest gamble in ancient warfare. Behind him stretched the lands of Spain, newly conquered and loyal to his command. Before him loomed the towering, snow-covered mountains, the Alps, nature's impenetrable walls separating Gaul from Italy. Every Roman strategist believed such a crossing was impossible for an army. But Hannibal believed otherwise. He was not simply fighting a war, he was fighting to fulfill his father's oath, to bring Rome to its knees. As his army began the ascent, it was a sight both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalrymen, pack animals, and mighty African war elephants climbed through narrow passes and icy cliffs. Snow fell like knives. Avalanches buried paths. Mountain tribes attacked from above, rolling boulders onto the struggling soldiers. The screams of men and beasts echoed through the frozen valleys. The losses were immense. Men starved, froze, and slipped to their deaths. The elephants, unused to the cold, suffered terribly, yet they pressed forward. Through every hardship, Hannibal remained unshaken. He rode among his men, sharing their pain, lifting their spirits with fearless determination. He told them, "Beyond these mountains lies the enemy's land, rich, fertile, and unguarded. Conquer these heights, and you will conquer Rome." His voice became a beacon of hope. Step by step, they pushed through storms and ambushes. After 15 brutal days, the survivors, fewer than half of the original force, finally descended into the plains of northern Italy. What they saw below was breathtaking, the fertile Po Valley, shimmering with rivers and green fields. They had done the impossible. From the western lands of Spain, through hostile Gaul, and over the deadliest mountains in Europe, Hannibal had brought war to Rome's doorstep. When the news reached the Roman Senate, panic spread. No foreign enemy had invaded Italy in centuries. Rome had believed its natural defenses were unbeatable. But now, the unthinkable had happened. Hannibal had crossed the Alps. And he had not come for negotiation. He had come for vengeance. The Romans scrambled to respond. Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus led one army north to confront the invader, while another, commanded by Publius Cornelius Scipio, moved to intercept Hannibal near the Po River. The two consuls believed their combined legions could crush the Carthaginian army quickly. But Hannibal was already planning a trap that would mark the beginning of his legendary campaign. The two armies first clashed near the Ticinus River, where Hannibal's cavalry crushed the Roman horsemen. Scipio himself was wounded and barely escaped with his life, saved by his son, a young officer named Publius Cornelius Scipio, who would one day become Hannibal's greatest rival, Scipio Africanus. After Ticinus, Hannibal moved south toward the Trebia River, drawing the Romans after him. In December of 218 BCE, winter winds lashed the plains of northern Italy. The Trebia's waters were icy and swift. Hannibal knew the Romans' pride would make them attack first. He ordered his brother Mago to hide a detachment of soldiers in a nearby ravine before dawn. Then, he baited the Romans into battle. At sunrise, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry rode forward, harassing the Roman camp. Furious, Consul Sempronius ordered his troops to pursue without waiting for breakfast or proper formation. The Roman soldiers, half-starved and freezing, crossed the frigid Trebia waters and attacked. That was exactly what Hannibal wanted. His lines absorbed the Roman charge, and then, at the perfect moment, Mago's hidden troops struck from behind. Panic spread among the Roman ranks as they found themselves surrounded, elephants crashing through their lines, cavalry slashing from the flanks, and spearmen advancing relentlessly from the front. The Roman army broke apart. Thousands drowned in the freezing river or were cut down as they fled. It was a devastating defeat. Hannibal's tactical genius had turned Rome's strength into weakness. The news of the disaster reached the capital like a thunderclap. Fear began to ripple through Italy. Hannibal's name was whispered with awe and dread. He had destroyed a Roman army in open battle on their own soil. But this was only the beginning. In the spring of 217 BCE, Hannibal continued his march through Italy. He moved southward, burning farms, freeing slaves, and calling upon Rome's Italian allies to join him. Many were tempted, others hesitated, fearing Roman punishment. Hannibal's goal was not just military victory, it was to break the unity of the Roman Republic from within. Rome, still reeling from the Trebia disaster, raised new armies. The Senate appointed Consul Gaius Flaminius, a bold but impulsive leader, to confront the Carthaginian invader. Hannibal, ever the strategist, decided to use the consul's arrogance against him. Near Lake Trasimene, in the hills of central Italy, he found the perfect place for an ambush, a narrow road between the lake and the surrounding mountains. Under cover of night, Hannibal positioned his army with surgical precision. His main force waited behind the hills, while his cavalry blocked the exits. At dawn, mist rolled over the water, blinding visibility. As Flaminius led his legions into the narrow pass, the trap was sprung. From the fog and hills erupted the thunder of horns and the roar of Carthaginian warriors. Hannibal's soldiers poured down on the Romans from every side. The surprise was total. The Romans were trapped between the cliffs and the lake, unable to form proper lines. The ground shook as elephants charged, cavalrymen cut through the rear, and infantry hacked their way through panicked soldiers. The battle turned into a massacre. By noon, more than 15,000 Romans lay dead. Thousands more were captured. Consul Flaminius himself was slain on the field. It was one of the largest ambushes in military history, a masterclass in deception and timing. When the Senate heard of the catastrophe, Rome fell into mourning. The Republic had now lost two massive armies in less than 2 years. Fear turned into desperation. For the first time, the Romans appointed a dictator, a single man to hold absolute power and save the state. His name was Quintus Fabius Maximus, soon to be known as the Delayer. Hannibal had proven that Rome's armies could bleed, that its generals could fail, and that its heart could tremble. Yet, even as victory crowned him again and again, Hannibal knew the hardest part was still to come. Because his ultimate goal was not just victory, it was the destruction of Rome itself. Rome was bleeding. The disasters at the Trebia and Lake Trasimene had left the Republic shaken to its core. Families wept in the streets, temples overflowed with prayers, and senators argued endlessly about how to stop the Carthaginian storm sweeping through Italy. Every Roman army that had faced Hannibal had been crushed. In desperation, the Senate turned to a man whose patience would become legendary, Quintus Fabius Maximus. Appointed as dictator, Fabius took command of all Roman forces in 217 BCE. But unlike his predecessors, he did not rush into battle. He studied Hannibal, analyzed his tactics, and realized something that others had not. Hannibal wanted to fight grand, decisive battles where his genius could shine. Fabius refused to give him that chance. Instead of confronting the Carthaginian army directly, Fabius adopted a new approach, one that infuriated both his soldiers and fellow politicians. He ordered his troops to shadow Hannibal from a distance, attacking only when it was safe. He burned crops and blocked supplies, forcing Hannibal to live off the land. He turned the war into a game of patience, starving the invader instead of fighting him. Hannibal, ever cunning, saw through Fabius's strategy. He tried to provoke the Romans into battle, burning villages, threatening towns, and spreading chaos across Italy. But Fabius would not be drawn out. His soldiers called him cowardly, the Senate mocked him as cunctator, meaning the delayer. Yet slowly, quietly, his plan worked. Hannibal's army began to suffer from hunger and fatigue. His allies grew restless. Still, the Roman people were impatient. They wanted revenge, not waiting. When Fabius's term as dictator ended, the Senate quickly returned power to the consuls, hoping for bold action. Rome would soon learn that impatience was its deadliest weakness. For Hannibal had been waiting for this moment. He knew the Romans' pride would make them act recklessly, and he was ready to deliver a lesson that would echo for centuries. The year was 216 BCE, and Hannibal's army had been roaming Italy for nearly 2 years. Despite constant pressure from Rome, his forces remained strong and loyal. Now he moved into southern Italy, seizing the vast grain stores near the small town of Cannae in the Apulia region. It was a brilliant strategic move. He captured not just supplies but a location that would force Rome to respond. Rome, determined to end this nightmare once and for all, raised the largest army in its history. Over 80,000 soldiers were assembled, legions upon legions of infantry, cavalry, and auxiliaries. The command was shared between two consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Paulus favored caution, much like Fabius, but Varro demanded action. Rome's honor, he said, could only be restored through total victory. When the Roman legions reached Cannae, the hot summer wind carried dust across the plains. The two armies faced each other near the river Aufidus, surrounded by open ground, perfect terrain for cavalry. Hannibal's men were outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. Yet, he smiled. He had chosen this battlefield himself, for he had a plan that would turn Rome's strength into its downfall. On the morning of battle, Hannibal arranged his army in a crescent formation, with his weakest troops, the Gauls and Spaniards, in the center and his strongest African infantry on the flanks. His cavalry, led by his brother Hasdrubal, guarded one wing, while the Numidian horsemen took the other. The Romans, confident and hungry for victory, formed dense blocks, intending to crush the Carthaginian center with brute force. But Hannibal's trap was already set. As the sun rose higher, the heat grew unbearable. Dust and sweat stung the soldiers' eyes. Drums thundered, horns sounded, and the greatest battle of the ancient world began. When the Roman legions advanced, their sheer numbers looked unstoppable. They slammed into Hannibal's center, pushing his Gauls and Spaniards backward. The crescent line began to bend inward, then further, forming a bowl shape. To the Romans, it looked like victory, the enemy was collapsing. But in reality, they were walking straight into Hannibal's trap. As the Roman army surged deeper, Hannibal gave the signal. The African infantry on the flanks pivoted inward like closing jaws, striking the Roman sides. At the same time, Hasdrubal's cavalry had already destroyed the Roman horsemen and charged into the rear of the Roman formation. Within moments, the mighty Roman army was surrounded, trapped in a tightening ring of death. The battlefield turned into a nightmare. There was no room to fight, no space to retreat. Dust and blood filled the air. Roman soldiers were crushed against each other, unable to lift their weapons. Carthaginian spears and swords cut them down without mercy. The screams of tens of thousands filled the plains. Some Romans drowned in the blood and bodies of their comrades. Others begged the gods for death. By sunset, the ground around Cannae was littered with corpses, an ocean of red. Nearly 50,000 Romans were dead, including Consul Paulus, most of the Senate's elite, and countless officers. It was one of the greatest defeats in military history, a masterpiece of tactics that would be studied by generals for millennia. Hannibal had achieved what no enemy ever had. He had annihilated the Roman army on Italian soil. When word reached Rome, the city fell silent. There were no celebrations, no speeches, only grief and fear. Every Roman household mourned a father, a brother, or a son. Yet even in this darkest hour, Rome refused to surrender. The Senate forbade mourning clothes, declaring that despair was unworthy of Romans. Hannibal stood victorious, but victory brought a dilemma. His generals urged him to march directly on Rome, to end the war once and for all. Yet Hannibal, with no siege equipment and exhausted troops, hesitated. The chance to destroy Rome completely slipped away. Still, the legend of Cannae was born, a symbol of total destruction and the brilliance of Hannibal Barca. The Romans would never forget the lesson carved into their history that day. The defeat at Cannae was unlike anything Rome had ever faced. Nearly every noble family had lost someone. The fields outside Cannae were carpeted with the bodies of Roman sons, a generation nearly wiped out. The air in the city was heavy with grief, but also with fear. Many believed the end of the Republic had come. Allies in southern Italy began to waver, and some defected to Hannibal's side, believing Rome's power broken forever. Yet, in this hour of despair, the Roman spirit revealed its true strength. The Senate met in silence. There was no panic, no surrender. When others might have begged for peace, Rome instead declared a vow: the city would fight until either it or Carthage ceased to exist. The Senate forbade mourning, declaring that tears would only weaken resolve. Survivors were reorganized, slaves were promised freedom for military service, and boys barely of age were armed to defend the Republic. Hannibal expected Rome to negotiate after such a devastating loss. When no ambassadors arrived, he was stunned. He had shattered their armies, but not their will. The Roman people refused to acknowledge defeat. Even without armies, they raised new legions, and even without supplies, they continued to fight. The disaster at Cannae did not destroy Rome, it transformed it. In this moment of crisis, the Senate turned once again to Fabius Maximus, the man who had once been mocked as a coward. His strategy, once hated, was now praised as wisdom. Fabius was recalled to lead, not as a dictator, but as the Republic's guiding hand. His plan was simple but effective: deny Hannibal battle, isolate him, and bleed his forces over time. Rome would rebuild slowly, avoiding rash confrontations. While Hannibal roamed Italy seeking allies, Rome fortified its heartlands, guarded supply routes, and methodically retook rebel towns. The Romans began to understand Hannibal's brilliance, but they also learned his weakness: he had no reinforcements from Carthage. His genius was unmatched, but even geniuses need support. And Carthage, distracted by politics and greed, refused to send him the help he needed most. From the ashes of Cannae, a new Rome began to rise, colder, harder, and more determined than ever before. As years passed after Cannae, the war turned into a contest of endurance rather than glory. Hannibal, once the master of bold maneuvers, found himself drawn into a slow and grinding struggle against time. The Fabian strategy, as it came to be known, was working. Fabius Maximus directed Rome's efforts not toward grand battles but toward starvation and attrition. He understood Hannibal's weakness, his dependence on supplies and allies. Hannibal's army, though mighty, was far from home. He could not draw food or weapons from Carthage, only from what he could seize in Italy. So Fabius made every resource scarce. Roman patrols guarded mountain passes. Fields were burned before Hannibal could reach them. Towns that defected to Carthage were swiftly punished. Rome re-established control over central and northern Italy, forcing Hannibal further south. Even when the Carthaginian commander attempted to lure Roman armies into traps, Fabius refused to bite. The war became one of nerves, of patience, starvation, and willpower. Hannibal's frustration grew. He was a man of action, a master of decisive victories. But against Fabius's strategy of evasion and exhaustion, his brilliance could not shine. His army began to shrink, not through battle, but through disease, desertion, and hunger. His war elephants had long perished in the Alps, and now even his cavalry numbers dwindled. Meanwhile, Rome's resilience began to pay off. The Republic rebuilt its navy, reformed its legions, and began new campaigns in Spain and Sicily, cutting off Hannibal's potential reinforcements. For the first time, the Carthaginian general began to lose his aura of invincibility. And yet, Fabius's strategy was unpopular among Rome's younger commanders. They saw it as cowardice, a refusal to face the enemy. But Fabius knew better. He understood that patience was Rome's only hope. He often said, "He who knows how to conquer himself conquers the enemy." As the years dragged on, Fabius's methods slowly turned the tide. Rome learned to endure. And endurance, more than genius, would decide the fate of the Punic Wars. While Italy burned under the shadow of Hannibal, another war raged hundreds of miles away, in Spain. Here, Rome struck at the very roots of Carthage's power. Spain was Carthage's lifeline, its source of silver, soldiers, and supplies. If Rome could sever this artery, Hannibal would be trapped, isolated, and doomed. The Roman generals Publius Cornelius Scipio and his brother Gnaeus Scipio were sent to Spain to confront Hannibal's family. The Carthaginian commander's brother, Hasdrubal Barca, was tasked with defending Carthage's interests there. The war in Spain became a brutal back-and-forth struggle of ambushes, sieges, and river battles. For years, the Scipios fought with courage and cunning, but in 211 BCE, both brothers were killed in battle, and Rome seemed to lose its grip on the region. Yet from this tragedy rose a new figure, Publius Cornelius Scipio the Younger, the son of the fallen general. Barely in his 20s, Scipio was elected commander by the army itself, an extraordinary act in Roman history. Scipio possessed something rare among Romans, imagination and vision. Where others saw defeat, he saw opportunity. He studied Hannibal's campaigns carefully, not to imitate but to learn. He realized that to defeat a mind like Hannibal's, Rome needed not just courage but creativity. Scipio began rebuilding Roman power in Spain, uniting local tribes and striking at Carthaginian strongholds with speed and precision. In a daring move, he captured New Carthage, the jewel of Carthaginian Spain, by surprise assault. The victory electrified Rome and marked the beginning of a new era in the war. While Fabius drained Hannibal's strength in Italy, Scipio was cutting off his roots abroad. The balance of power began to shift. For the first time since the Alps crossing, Rome dared to hope. As the fires of war spread across continents, one truth became clear: the struggle between Rome and Carthage was no longer just about land or revenge. It was a battle between two visions of destiny, Hannibal's brilliance versus Rome's unbreakable will. By 210 BCE, Spain had become the beating heart of the Punic War. It was a land soaked in blood, mountains echoing with war cries, rivers choked with bodies, and cities forever changed by the endless struggle between Rome and Carthage. Both powers knew that whoever controlled Spain would control the future of the Mediterranean. Into this maelstrom stepped a young Roman, Publius Cornelius Scipio, barely 25 years old, yet already carrying the reputation of a visionary. After the deaths of his father and uncle, Rome's confidence in Spain had faltered. No senator dared to lead there, fearing another disaster. But Scipio volunteered, declaring before the Senate that only by daring greater than Hannibal can Rome survive him. His courage, charisma, and belief in destiny won over even the most cautious politicians. Arriving in Spain, Scipio faced not just enemies but despair. Roman morale was broken, and many Iberian tribes had turned against them. Yet, Scipio did not rely on brute force, he relied on psychology and speed, weapons Hannibal himself had mastered. His first target was bold, New Carthage, the Carthaginian capital in Spain, heavily fortified and thought untouchable. Scipio studied the tides, the geography, and even the enemy's habits. He realized that the city's lagoon, which protected one side, could be crossed during low tide, something the defenders believed impossible. In a daring dawn assault, Roman forces struck from multiple directions while a secret group of men waded through the shallow waters, scaling the undefended side. The attack was swift, brutal, and brilliant. Within hours, New Carthage fell. The city's armories, silver mines, and supplies became Rome's. Even more importantly, Scipio captured valuable hostages, treating them with kindness to win the loyalty of Spain's tribes. He freed prisoners, honored local customs, and spoke not as a conqueror but as a liberator. In one stroke, Scipio achieved what no Roman had. He shattered Carthage's power in Spain and turned the tide of the war. His name began to echo across the Mediterranean. In Rome, the people whispered, "Perhaps Scipio is the one chosen by the gods to end Hannibal." But the war was far from over. Carthage still had one hope, Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal Barca, who was now gathering a massive army to march through the Alps and join his brother in Italy. The two Barcas together could have destroyed Rome. But fate had other plans. In 208 BCE, Hasdrubal Barca, a brilliant general in his own right, took command of Carthaginian forces in northern Spain. He shared his brother's ambition, discipline, and charisma, but he lacked Hannibal's legendary audacity. Still, his plan was bold: unite his army with Hannibal's in Italy and crush Rome in a single, unstoppable campaign. After a series of skirmishes with Scipio, Hasdrubal realized that Spain could no longer be saved. He gathered his best men, veterans hardened by years of fighting, and began his march northward, across the Pyrenees and toward the Alps. It was a mirror of Hannibal's journey a decade earlier, but this time, Rome was ready. When word reached the Senate that another Carthaginian army was crossing into Italy, fear swept through the Republic. Memories of Hannibal's invasion still haunted the people. The Senate ordered every general in Italy to mobilize. Rome could not allow the two Barca brothers to unite, that would mean total destruction. Hasdrubal, though cautious, advanced steadily, sending messengers to inform Hannibal of his approach. But fate was cruel. The message, intercepted by Roman scouts, never reached its destination. Hannibal, unaware that his brother was near, remained in southern Italy, waiting in vain. Meanwhile, the Roman consuls Marcus Livius Salinator and Gaius Claudius Nero coordinated a daring plan. Nero would secretly detach a portion of his army from the south and march north in record time to join Livius. Moving with incredible speed, over 250 miles in just a few days, Nero's arrival would give Rome a decisive advantage. As Hasdrubal's exhausted army reached the banks of the Metaurus River, he found himself trapped between two Roman forces. His scouts misjudged their numbers, believing he faced only one army. The stage was set for one of the most decisive and tragic battles of the entire war. That night, under a pale moon, Hasdrubal realized he was alone, surrounded, and outnumbered. Yet, like his brother, he would not surrender. He prepared his men for what would be their final stand, unaware that his death would seal Hannibal's fate forever. Dawn broke over the valley of the Metaurus River. Mist clung to the fields as Hasdrubal arrayed his weary army for battle. His troops, though brave, were drained by the long march and demoralized by uncertainty. Across the plain, the Roman legion stood in perfect formation, tens of thousands of disciplined soldiers waiting silently for the signal to attack. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes the end of empires. Hasdrubal positioned his Spanish infantry in the center, his Gallic warriors on one flank, and his small but fierce cavalry on the other. He hoped to hold long enough for nightfall, perhaps to retreat and regroup. But Nero, the Roman consul, was determined to destroy him utterly. The Roman assault began with thunderous horns and cries of vengeance for Cannae. At first, the Carthaginians fought with desperate courage. The Spanish infantry held firm, clashing shield to shield with the advancing legions. But soon, the Roman discipline began to show. Nero personally led a flanking maneuver, striking Hasdrubal's forces from the side while Livius pressed from the front. The Gauls broke first, their lines collapsing under the relentless advance. Realizing the battle was lost, Hasdrubal refused to flee. Instead, he spurred his horse forward, charging directly into the Roman ranks, seeking an honorable death. Surrounded and outnumbered, he fought until he was cut down, a warrior to the end. When the battle ended, the ground was littered with Carthaginian dead. Rome had triumphed. The victory at the Metaurus was not just a battle won, it was the turning point of the war. Hasdrubal's army was annihilated, and his dream of reuniting with Hannibal died with him. When the Romans later threw Hasdrubal's severed head into Hannibal's camp in southern Italy, the great general stood in silence, staring at it. He did not weep. He did not rage. He simply said, "I see the doom of Carthage." From that day forward, Hannibal knew the war in Italy was lost. He would continue to fight, but the tide had turned forever. Rome, once on the brink of collapse, was now on the march, stronger, united, and determined to finish the fight it had started nearly 2 decades earlier. After the death of Hasdrubal Barca at the Metaurus, the balance of the Punic Wars shifted decisively. Spain, once the glittering jewel of Carthage's empire, was now slipping from its grasp. The young Roman commander Publius Cornelius Scipio, already hailed as a hero for his conquest of New Carthage, pressed his advantage. He understood that to destroy Hannibal, he must first destroy Carthage's power base, and that meant erasing their presence from Spain forever. By 206 BCE, Scipio had transformed his legions into a finely tuned instrument of war. He trained them not just to fight but to think like their enemy, fast, flexible, and ruthless. His soldiers adored him, calling him the new Alexander. Yet, Scipio's brilliance was not only military but psychological. He understood that victory required hearts as much as swords. Through diplomacy, he secured the loyalty of many Iberian tribes who had once fought for Carthage. Carthage's remaining generals, Mago and Hasdrubal Gisco, struggled to hold their ground. They attempted to unite their armies near the town of Ilipa, hoping to crush Scipio before he could grow stronger. But Scipio was already one step ahead. He studied their formations, learned their routines, and prepared a trap that would mirror Hannibal's tactics at Cannae. At dawn, Scipio deliberately arranged his weaker troops in the center and his strongest legions on the wings, the reverse of his usual deployment. The Carthaginians, expecting a repeat of earlier Roman tactics, mirrored their own formations accordingly. When battle began, Scipio ordered his flanks to attack first, striking the Carthaginian sides before their center could even advance. The maneuver was devastating. Caught off guard, the Carthaginian lines crumbled under the Roman onslaught. As dust and screams filled the battlefield, Scipio's cavalry swept behind the enemy, cutting off their retreat. By sunset, the Carthaginian army had been annihilated. The Battle of Ilipa was one of the most complete victories in Roman history, a masterpiece of deception and timing. With this triumph, Spain was lost to Carthage forever. Scipio's victory not only secured Rome's western flank but also elevated him to a legend. The Republic, once humiliated at Cannae, now stood ascendant. Scipio had proven that Rome could produce a general as brilliant as Hannibal himself, and perhaps even more dangerous. The defeat in Spain struck Carthage like a thunderbolt. The Senate in Carthage, a divided and cautious body dominated by merchants and politicians, was thrown into chaos. Without Spain's silver and manpower, their ability to fund the war was crippled. Yet even as disaster loomed, Carthage remained paralyzed by internal strife. For years, the Barcid family had acted independently, commanding vast territories in Spain with little interference from the mother city. Many senators resented their power. Now, with Hasdrubal dead and Spain lost, these politicians turned on Hannibal himself, blaming him for the war's ruinous cost. Carthage's ruling elite, always more concerned with trade than with warfare, refused to provide the reinforcements and supplies Hannibal desperately needed in Italy. While Rome grew stronger with every passing year, Hannibal was forced to watch his empire disintegrate from afar. His once grand army was now trapped in southern Italy, cut off from reinforcements and slowly withering away. He had fought the Romans to a standstill for nearly a decade, but even genius cannot defeat hunger, exhaustion, and politics. Meanwhile, Rome expanded its influence beyond Italy. The Senate sent fleets to patrol the Mediterranean and armies to secure Sicily and Sardinia. Every move tightened the noose around Carthage's neck. Cities that once feared Hannibal now saw Rome as the inevitable victor and switched sides. In Carthage itself, the cries for peace began to rise. Merchants begged for negotiations, fearing economic ruin. But Hannibal's allies urged resistance, warning that Rome would demand total surrender. The Senate hesitated, caught between fear and pride. Across the sea, Scipio watched and waited. He understood that the key to ending the war was not in Italy, where Hannibal remained unbroken, but in Africa itself. To defeat Carthage, one must strike at its heart, he told his men. The Senate hesitated to approve such a daring plan, but Scipio's reputation made refusal impossible. Thus, as Carthage collapsed inward, Rome prepared to carry the war across the sea, to the very gates of Hannibal's homeland. When Scipio returned to Rome in 205 BCE, he was no longer just a general, he was a symbol. The people hailed him as a savior, the man who had avenged the disasters of Cannae and restored Roman honor. The Senate, however, was wary. Many senators still feared his youth and ambition. They remembered how Hannibal's brilliance had nearly destroyed them, and they saw a reflection of that same brilliance in Scipio. But Scipio was not a reckless conqueror. He was a visionary. He proposed a bold plan, to take the war directly to North Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy. It was a daring gamble, one that could end the war or destroy Rome's last hope. Opposition in the Senate was fierce. Fabius Maximus himself, now an old man, argued that such a campaign was madness. Yet Scipio stood firm. "Hannibal has brought war to our homeland," he said. "I will bring it to his." Eventually, Scipio's charisma and record of victories won the day. He was granted command of the African expedition, though with limited resources, a test of both his leadership and his faith in the gods. In 204 BCE, he set sail from Sicily with a modest but well-trained army. His destination, Utica, near Carthage. The arrival of Roman legions on African soil shocked the Carthaginians. Never before had an enemy set foot so close to their capital. At first, Carthage underestimated the young general, believing he could be crushed easily. But Scipio quickly forged alliances with Numidian princes, including the brilliant cavalry commander Massinissa, turning Carthage's own allies against it. In battle after battle, Scipio proved his genius anew: swift ambushes, precise tactics, and clever diplomacy. He combined Roman discipline with the adaptability of Hannibal's own methods. Each victory brought him closer to Carthage itself. Back in Italy, Hannibal finally received the message that changed everything: Carthage was under threat. The city that had once ruled the seas now trembled in fear. Reluctantly, Hannibal prepared to leave the land he had fought upon for 16 years. His journey was over. He would return home for one final confrontation, a battle that would decide the fate of the ancient world. By 211 BCE, Hannibal's campaign in Italy had become both legendary and exhausting. For nearly a decade, he roamed the Italian peninsula, destroying Roman armies and humiliating the Republic's pride. Yet despite his victories, Rome refused to surrender. The city's iron discipline, deep manpower reserves, and organized system of alliances kept it standing strong. While Hannibal's tactical brilliance was unmatched, he lacked the reinforcements and resources needed to finish the war. Carthage, distracted by internal politics and its focus on defending Spain and Africa, provided him little support. Meanwhile, Rome changed its strategy. Rather than facing Hannibal directly, they adopted a war of attrition. They cut off his supply lines, fortified their cities, and attacked his allies one by one. The Roman general Fabius Maximus, once mocked as cunctator, the delayer, had been right: patience, not fury, would break Hannibal's strength. As Rome slowly reclaimed its lost territories, the balance of power began to shift. Hannibal's army, once a roaring beast, was now stranded deep in enemy land, unable to strike the killing blow. The stage was being set for a dramatic reversal of fortunes, one that would soon carry the fight beyond Italy's borders. While Hannibal fought in Italy, another hero rose to fame in the west: Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. Born into a noble family that had suffered heavy losses in Spain, Scipio entered the war with a mix of vengeance and vision. At only 25, he took command of the Roman forces in Spain, a theater that had become critical for controlling trade, silver, and reinforcements for Carthage. Scipio's approach was bold and unorthodox. He combined speed, surprise, and diplomacy, uniting local tribes and using psychological warfare to undermine Carthaginian morale. His greatest triumph came at New Carthage in 209 BCE, where he launched a daring amphibious assault that shocked the enemy. Within a single day, he captured the city, seizing vast supplies and freeing hostages, which strengthened Rome's image among Spanish allies. With each victory, Scipio grew not only in power but in confidence. He understood that to defeat Hannibal, he would need to strike at the heart of Carthaginian strength, its homeland. As his forces secured Spain, Scipio prepared for the most ambitious move of the war: to bring the fight directly to North Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal himself. By 204 BCE, Scipio's plan was set in motion. Rome, after years of defensive warfare, was ready to take the offensive. The Senate hesitated at first, fearing another disaster like those Hannibal had inflicted, but Scipio's charisma and record won them over. He sailed to Africa with a seasoned army, forming alliances with the Numidian prince Massinissa, a move that would prove decisive. Massinissa's cavalry gave Rome the mobility it had long lacked. In Africa, Scipio ravaged Carthaginian lands, forcing the Senate of Carthage into panic. Desperate, they summoned their greatest general back from Italy. After 16 years abroad, Hannibal finally set foot again in his homeland. Yet he returned to a changed world, his veterans were few, his elephants gone, and his homeland weary. Both men, Hannibal and Scipio, knew that their coming battle would decide the fate of two empires. The confrontation that the world had waited for was finally approaching. The Mediterranean held its breath, as the two most brilliant military minds of the ancient world prepared to face each other in one final, decisive clash, the Battle of Zama. After 16 years of campaigning in Italy, Hannibal Barca returned to his homeland in 204 BCE. The city of Carthage, once confident in its ability to hold Rome at bay, now trembled. The Republic's successes in Spain under Scipio Africanus had cut off vital resources, leaving Carthage exposed. Hannibal arrived with an army reduced by years of continuous warfare, veterans hardened by Italy's battlefields but outnumbered and weary. Yet his presence alone inspired fear. He reorganized Carthage's forces, drafting citizen militias, hiring mercenaries, and calling upon the Numidian cavalry, though many remained loyal to Massinissa, Scipio's ally. Hannibal understood that this confrontation would decide the future of both Carthage and Rome. Unlike Italy, where terrain had allowed him to ambush and outflank Roman armies, here, in the wide plains near Zama, open battle would favor Rome's disciplined legions and Scipio's tactical brilliance. Hannibal positioned his forces carefully, preparing for the first engagement against a Roman army that was not merely reacting but attacking decisively. He arrayed his troops in traditional Carthaginian formations, with elephants at the forefront, cavalry on the wings, and infantry arranged in multiple lines behind. The sheer sight of these beasts, their trunks swaying, trumpeting over the plains, struck fear into the hearts of many Roman allies who had never faced them. Yet Hannibal also knew his elephants were fewer and weaker than in past battles. Their purpose would be to break the Roman lines initially and sow confusion, buying time for his infantry to exploit any gaps. Across the plain, Scipio studied the Carthaginian deployment carefully. He had learned from Hannibal's own history, overconfidence could be fatal. Every detail mattered, the placement of troops, the timing of cavalry charges, and the handling of war elephants. He observed Hannibal's front line, anticipating the charge, and devised a unique strategy. Roman manipular formations would open lanes for elephants to pass harmlessly through, while missile units targeted them with spears and javelins. Scipio's innovation turned fear into advantage, using Hannibal's own weapons against him. The tension was palpable. Thousands of soldiers lined up, the sun beating down, dust swirling, as the Mediterranean wind carried the scent of war across the plains. Every warrior understood that this battle would decide the fate of nations, the future of empires, and the legacies of two legendary generals. In the morning of 202 BCE, the Battle of Zama began with the thunder of hooves and the trumpeting of elephants. Hannibal ordered the beasts forward, hoping to break Roman morale immediately. The ground shook as massive creatures charged, carrying armored riders and spears meant to impale and scatter. Roman soldiers, disciplined and trained for this moment, split their formations to create lanes, allowing the elephants to pass through while being targeted by volleys of javelins. Many elephants panicked and turned back, trampling Carthaginian infantry in the process. This early advantage shifted the momentum. Scipio's manipular system, flexible and responsive, allowed Roman lines to absorb the initial shock and reform instantly. The battle raged for hours. Carthaginian infantry pressed hard, attempting to exploit every opportunity, while Roman forces advanced methodically, shield by shield, maintaining cohesion. The Numidian cavalry on both flanks clashed in a furious melee. Massinissa's forces, well-trained and motivated, began to outflank Hannibal's own cavalry, forcing them to retreat. Hannibal's hope of controlling the battlefield's wings began to crumble. Yet he did not falter. Leading from the front, he inspired his men with unmatched courage, cutting down enemies and rallying wavering units. The fight was brutal and chaotic, dust, blood, and the cries of the dying filling the air. Scipio's leadership was equally remarkable. He personally moved between lines, shouting orders, inspiring his men, and coordinating reinforcements. His innovative approach of opening lanes for elephants proved decisive, neutralizing the threat before it could damage the Roman formations. Slowly, with relentless pressure and superior coordination, Rome began to gain the upper hand. The Carthaginian army, despite bravery and tactical genius, was forced back, line by line, unable to respond to Scipio's adaptability and disciplined troops. Every moment mattered. The battle was not just a clash of armies but a contest of wills, Hannibal's daring and experience against Scipio's innovation and strategy. As the sun reached its zenith, the Carthaginian army began to collapse. Hannibal's veterans, exhausted from decades of campaigning, could not withstand the organized assault of Roman legions. Massinissa's cavalry returned from routing the enemy flank to attack from behind, completing a perfect encirclement reminiscent of Hannibal's own tactics at Cannae, but this time against him. Carthaginian morale shattered. Units broke and fled, while others surrendered en masse. Hannibal, though wounded and surrounded, fought with unyielding courage, cutting through enemies and inspiring his men to resist until the final moment. Yet even his brilliance could not alter the outcome. By nightfall, the battlefield was a scene of utter devastation for Carthage. Tens of thousands of soldiers lay dead or captured. The elephants that had once symbolized terror now littered the plains, symbols of a dream that had ended. Scipio's victory was total. Hannibal's attempt to defend his homeland had failed. Rome had achieved what no other power had managed. It had decisively defeated Carthage, not in Italy, not through attrition, but at the very heart of its empire. The Republic's rise to unchallenged dominance in the Mediterranean was now assured. Hannibal survived the battlefield but lost the war, retreating into obscurity. Scipio, honored as Africanus, cemented his place as one of history's greatest military minds. The Battle of Zama ended the Second Punic War, shifting the balance of power, establishing Rome as the premier superpower of the ancient world, and setting the stage for its expansion across the Mediterranean for centuries to come. The plains of Zama, once alive with the thundering charge of elephants and the clash of Roman and Carthaginian shields, were now silent. Smoke rose from the battlefield, mingling with the copper scent of blood. Survivors staggered, some moaning, some stunned into motionless shock. Hannibal, despite his genius and courage, had seen his grand campaign brought to an irreversible end. Rome had proven, through discipline, strategy, and adaptability, that even the brilliance of Hannibal Barca could be overcome. The victory did not merely signal the end of a battle, it marked the collapse of Carthage's ability to wage war as a Mediterranean superpower. For the Roman legions, Zama was more than a victory, it was redemption. After the staggering losses at Cannae, Rome had clawed its way back from near annihilation. Soldiers and generals alike realized that the Republic's strength was not merely in armies but in its resilience, its capacity to endure setbacks, and its unbreakable societal structure. Rome's political machinery, with the Senate coordinating new strategies, the disciplined legions following orders, and its citizen body unwavering in support, had weathered Hannibal's brilliance and now demonstrated the power of unity and persistence. Hannibal himself, wounded but alive, was carried from the field by loyal troops. He had survived, yet the defeat weighed upon him as heavily as any physical injury. The defeat at Zama was not just military, it was existential for Carthage. Their allies across the Mediterranean, seeing the fate of Hannibal's army and the disciplined might of Rome, began to reconsider their loyalties. The once mighty Carthaginian Empire was no longer untouchable. Rome, through persistence and strategy, had established itself as the preeminent power in the region, capable of projecting influence far beyond the Italian peninsula. As the sun set over Zama, the battlefield littered with the debris of war, both sides recognized that history had shifted irrevocably. One empire had risen, another, humbled but not yet destroyed, faced a precarious future. The Carthaginian Senate, shaken by the staggering loss, had no choice but to negotiate terms with Rome. Rome, while victorious, approached the treaty not with vengeance alone but with calculated restraint designed to ensure Carthage would never again threaten the Republic's supremacy. The treaty imposed strict conditions on Carthage. The Republic could maintain its city, but its military power was severely restricted. The Carthaginian army could not possess elephants, warships, or the ability to wage offensive war without Rome's explicit consent. They were forced to pay a massive indemnity over 50 years, placing severe strain on their economy. This financial burden was designed to weaken Carthage's capacity to rebuild military power while simultaneously enriching Rome, which could now invest in expanding influence across the Mediterranean. Furthermore, Carthage had to cede territories, including its holdings in Spain, which Rome had already secured through Scipio's campaigns. These lands provided Rome with strategic ports, silver mines, and access to previously Carthaginian-controlled trade routes. The treaty also included political stipulations. Carthage could not make alliances independently that could threaten Roman interests. Hannibal, despite his personal popularity and genius, had to witness the dismantling of the empire he had sought to defend. It was a bitter pill, yet even in defeat, Hannibal maintained dignity, serving as an advisor to ensure Carthage's survival within the imposed restrictions. For Rome, the treaty was more than a document, it was a declaration of supremacy. It sent a message to the Mediterranean world that Rome's reach and influence were now unchallenged. No longer would Carthage dictate trade, war, or alliances in the western Mediterranean. The Republic, having endured near destruction, had emerged victorious, transforming from a regional power into a superpower with political and military influence extending far beyond the Italian peninsula. With the conclusion of the Second Punic War, Rome's status transformed forever. The Republic, which had nearly been annihilated at Cannae, now stood unchallenged in the western Mediterranean. The military genius of Scipio Africanus and the endurance of Roman society had created a model of resilience and adaptability unmatched in the ancient world. Rome's legions, battle-hardened and highly disciplined, now patrolled vast territories, projecting power across seas and continents. Trade routes, previously dominated by Carthage, came under Roman control, enriching the Republic and facilitating future expansion. Politically, Rome cemented its dominance through treaties, alliances, and colonies in former Carthaginian territories. Scipio returned to Rome in triumph, celebrated with parades and honors, his reputation rivaling even the legends of Alexander. The victory at Zama also established Rome's doctrine, a combination of strategic patience, adaptability, and overwhelming discipline could overcome even the most brilliant adversaries. Hannibal, though defeated, remained an enduring figure, a symbol of brilliance and audacity whose tactics would influence Roman generals for centuries. For the Mediterranean world, Rome's emergence signaled a new era, one dominated not by trade empires like Carthage but by the political, military, and cultural hegemony of the Republic. The lessons of the Punic Wars, etched in blood and strategy, would guide Roman policy and expansion, laying the foundation for an empire that would dominate the ancient world for centuries. Rome had survived disaster, defeated its greatest enemy, and risen as a true superpower, a republic forged in the fires of war and tempered by resilience, strategy, and unyielding determination. After the crushing defeat at Zama, Hannibal Barca returned to Carthage, not as a triumphant general but as a cautious statesman navigating a fractured republic. Though his reputation remained unparalleled, the political landscape had shifted drastically. The Senate, once tolerant of his military dominance, now feared his influence, suspecting he might destabilize Carthage with his charisma and experience. Hannibal, ever pragmatic, shifted his focus from the battlefield to politics. He embarked on a campaign to reform Carthage's finances and administration, seeking to recover its economy, stabilize governance, and prevent Rome from exploiting the city's weakened state. His reforms were ambitious. He attempted to reduce the power of aristocratic merchants who had long dominated Carthaginian policy, streamline tax collection, and implement measures to strengthen the city's internal defenses. Hannibal's vision was clear: Carthage must remain strong, even if it could never challenge Rome militarily again. Despite these efforts, Hannibal faced relentless opposition from rival politicians who feared his growing authority. As Roman influence expanded across the Mediterranean, Carthage's internal divisions deepened. Rome insisted on the enforcement of the harsh terms of the Treaty of Zama, which limited the city's military capabilities, imposed enormous reparations, and restricted its sovereignty in foreign affairs. Hannibal, aware that Carthage could not rebuild as long as Rome's shadow loomed, began to consider alternative avenues. Over the next decade, he remained a dominant figure in Carthaginian politics, but Rome's strategic presence in the region meant that any attempts to regain military or economic autonomy were constrained. Eventually, to escape Roman scrutiny and safeguard his life, Hannibal chose voluntary exile, traveling across the Mediterranean and offering his expertise to other kingdoms and rulers seeking to counter Rome's growing power. His departure marked the end of an era for Carthage, yet his influence persisted, leaving a lasting imprint on military strategy and political thought. Hannibal's exile did not diminish his reputation; in fact, it expanded his influence. Across the eastern Mediterranean, he advised kings and generals on warfare, fortifications, and diplomacy. Though he could no longer confront Rome directly, his strategies became the subject of study and admiration. His use of ambushes, terrain manipulation, and psychological warfare informed the tactics of countless commanders in the Hellenistic world. Hannibal's genius lay not only in his ability to defeat Roman armies but in his understanding of morale, deception, and strategic patience. These lessons would echo through centuries, influencing military minds from Julius Caesar to Napoleon Bonaparte. During his final years, Hannibal remained acutely aware of Rome's rise and Carthage's subjugation. While he advised neighboring kingdoms, he also monitored developments in North Africa, ensuring that Carthage retained some autonomy despite its reduced power. In exile, he became a symbol of defiance against overwhelming odds, a figure whose legacy transcended victory and defeat. Ancient historians, including Polybius and Livy, chronicled his campaigns not merely as military exploits but as case studies in leadership, innovation, and the psychological dimensions of warfare. Even as Carthage weakened politically and economically, Hannibal's presence inspired fear and respect among Rome's allies and enemies alike. His life became a testament to the power of intellect, courage, and vision in shaping history, proving that even in defeat, one individual's brilliance can leave an indelible mark on the world. The Punic Wars, spanning more than a century, reshaped the Mediterranean world. Hannibal's campaigns, especially his audacious crossing of the Alps and victories in Italy, remain among the most celebrated feats in military history. Yet the wars also demonstrated Rome's extraordinary capacity for resilience, adaptation, and long-term strategic thinking. The Republic endured near annihilation at Cannae, yet it rebuilt, learned, and ultimately triumphed. Rome's ability to combine disciplined armies, effective political institutions, and strategic patience set the stage for its emergence as a Mediterranean superpower. For Carthage, the wars were catastrophic. Its political independence survived, but its ability to wage offensive warfare was curtailed for decades. Economic resources were depleted, territories lost, and confidence shaken. Hannibal, while a figure of near-mythical brilliance, could not overcome the structural resilience of the Roman Republic. The lessons of the Punic Wars extended far beyond the immediate conflict. Generals and scholars would study Hannibal's tactics and Rome's strategies for centuries. Rome's victories demonstrated the importance of logistics, political unity, and strategic foresight, while Hannibal's campaigns illustrated the power of initiative, boldness, and psychological warfare. In the centuries that followed, the Roman Republic leveraged these lessons to expand across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, laying the foundations for an empire that would dominate the ancient world. Hannibal's life and the Punic Wars collectively became emblematic of the eternal struggle between brilliance and resilience, audacity and structure, and the individual and the state, a narrative that continues to captivate historians and military strategists to this day. After the conclusion of the Second Punic War, Rome faced a transformed Mediterranean landscape. The Republic had emerged victorious, but its triumph carried new challenges. While Carthage was weakened and politically constrained by the Treaty of Zama, other powers and regions, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and the Spanish territories, required consolidation. Rome's immediate task was to secure trade routes, establish fortified outposts, and prevent uprisings from fractious allies or rebellious cities. Scipio Africanus had proven the value of not only military brilliance but also diplomacy. His campaigns in Spain demonstrated how alliances with local tribes could extend Rome's influence without excessive bloodshed. Inspired by these lessons, the Senate implemented strategies to integrate conquered territories into the Roman orbit through a combination of colonization, political oversight, and economic incentives. Cities were given local autonomy under Roman oversight, and allies were assured protection in return for loyalty and military support. Rome also recognized the importance of naval supremacy. During the Punic Wars, Carthage had relied on its maritime strength to transport troops and supplies, while Rome struggled to match it in the early phases of conflict. Learning from these experiences, the Republic invested heavily in its fleet. Shipyards in Sicily and Italy were expanded, and innovations in naval architecture and tactics improved the Roman navy's maneuverability, coordination, and logistical endurance. By establishing a network of ports and fortified naval bases across the western Mediterranean, Rome ensured it could move armies swiftly, supply its forces efficiently, and project power across the seas. The integration of naval dominance with disciplined legions created a strategic advantage unmatched in the ancient world, allowing Rome not only to secure former Carthaginian territories but also to prepare for expansion beyond the western Mediterranean. With military victories secured, Rome turned its attention to the economic and political reorganization necessary to maintain dominance. The war had drained resources, and Rome recognized that sustainable control required careful management of finances, infrastructure, and provincial administration. Taxation systems were restructured to fund the maintenance of garrisons, public works, and naval fleets. Wealth from conquered territories, including silver from Spain and tributes from Carthage, fueled these initiatives, allowing Rome to invest in both defensive and expansionist capabilities. Politically, the Republic enhanced its provincial governance structure. Formerly autonomous or semi-independent regions were brought under direct Roman oversight through the appointment of magistrates and proconsuls, who were responsible for ensuring loyalty, collecting taxes, and managing local conflicts. Colonies of Roman citizens were established in strategic locations to act as both garrisons and symbols of Roman authority. Socially, this period witnessed the integration of local elites into Roman political and military systems. Local leaders could retain some influence while pledging allegiance to Rome, effectively co-opting potential sources of resistance. This dual approach, combining coercion with cooperation, minimized rebellion and solidified Rome's grip on its expanding territories. Economically, Rome leveraged the resources of conquered lands to strengthen its domestic and military infrastructure. Roads, ports, and fortified cities allowed for rapid troop movement, efficient communication, and the integration of trade networks. Agricultural production from territories like Sicily and Spain was redirected to support Roman armies and urban centers, ensuring both supply security and economic prosperity. This comprehensive approach to political and economic control laid the foundation for Rome's enduring supremacy and demonstrated the Republic's ability to convert battlefield victories into sustainable empire building. By the end of the Second Punic War, Rome had achieved more than just victory. It had transformed itself into a Mediterranean superpower with strategic dominance that extended far beyond Italy. The lessons learned from Hannibal's campaigns, logistics, adaptability, strategic patience, and the integration of diplomacy with military action, reshaped Roman thinking and military doctrine. Rome's legions were no longer simply defensive instruments, they became instruments of projection, capable of conducting campaigns across vast distances and varied terrains. The Republic's ability to adapt to new threats, reorganize politically, and integrate new territories created an enduring framework for empire building. Across the Mediterranean, Rome's influence now extended from the Italian heartland to the western coasts of Hispania, the islands of the Tyrrhenian and western Mediterranean seas, and the strategic ports and trading centers formerly dominated by Carthage. This strategic positioning allowed Rome to control sea lanes, monitor rival powers, and maintain rapid deployment capabilities for both defensive and offensive operations. The Republic's rise also transformed diplomacy. Rome's alliances with local kingdoms, tribes, and client states created a network of interdependent territories that strengthened its influence without overextending its military. By combining military power with political and economic integration, Rome set a precedent for empire building that would guide its expansion for centuries. The consolidation of power after the Second Punic War thus marked not only the end of Carthage's influence but also the beginning of Rome's enduring dominance, a dominance that would shape the politics, economy, and warfare of the Mediterranean world for generations. Rome had survived Hannibal, absorbed the lessons of nearly catastrophic defeat, and emerged as an unassailable power, ready to define the destiny of the ancient world. After its devastating defeat at Zama in 202 BCE, Carthage was a shadow of its former self. The Treaty of Zama had stripped it of its army, its elephants, its fleets, and much of its territory. The Republic was forced to pay an enormous indemnity to Rome, payable over 50 years, which drained the city's treasury and limited its ability to rebuild. Despite this, Carthage remained a prosperous trading hub, with wealthy merchants controlling commerce across the western Mediterranean. Its economy rebounded slowly, but the shadow of Rome loomed over every decision. Politically, the city was divided. Aristocratic families, some loyal to Rome and others still clinging to the old Barcid influence, frequently clashed over policy. Hannibal, though exiled for a time, had left a legacy of reform, including improved taxation and administration, but his absence weakened Carthage's internal unity. While Rome had no immediate desire to destroy Carthage entirely, it enforced strict limitations. The city could not wage offensive war, maintain a significant military, or expand its influence independently. These constraints created a tense balance. Carthage's neighbors, aware of its vulnerability, sometimes encroached on its borders, and the city's leadership was forced to negotiate constantly with Rome to avoid conflict. Over the following decades, Carthage maintained a cautious recovery, rebuilding commerce and fortifying its defenses, but always under the watchful eye of Rome. The once proud empire of Hannibal's forefathers was confined to its immediate surroundings, politically restricted and militarily constrained, a shadow of the dominant power it had been during the First Punic War. While Carthage struggled to recover, Rome capitalized on its newfound dominance. With Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia under its control, the Republic strengthened its influence across the western Mediterranean. Rome's military, tested and refined during the Punic Wars, became a model of strategic superiority, capable of rapid deployment and versatile operations. Its navy, expanded during and after the wars, patrolled sea lanes, enforcing Rome's dominance over trade and deterring rival powers. Politically, the Senate consolidated power, ensuring that provinces and allies remained loyal through a combination of oversight, treaties, and colonization. Rome's economic strength grew, fueled by tributes from former Carthaginian territories, control over strategic ports, and access to Mediterranean trade routes. Yet the Republic did not merely rely on material power, it also imposed psychological pressure on Carthage. Roman envoys frequently reminded Carthage of the limitations imposed by the Treaty of Zama, emphasizing that any attempt to rebuild military forces could provoke immediate retaliation. The presence of Roman armies in strategic locations, combined with the threat of political intervention in Carthage's internal affairs, created an atmosphere of constant tension. Carthage's leadership, aware of Rome's overwhelming capabilities, tread carefully. Any misstep could provoke Roman military action, yet Carthage also sought to protect its economic interests, maintain sovereignty over its remaining territories, and preserve its identity as a trading power. This delicate balance defined the post-war relationship, Rome ascendant and assertive, Carthage cautious and constrained, yet still resilient in commerce and administration. By the mid-2nd century BCE, tensions between Rome and Carthage had begun to escalate. Carthage's recovery in commerce, though legal under the Treaty of Zama, provoked jealousy and suspicion in Rome. Roman politicians, especially the hawkish faction, argued that Carthage's resurgence threatened Rome's supremacy and could inspire other cities to challenge Roman authority. These sentiments, amplified by influential senators and generals, sowed the seeds of future conflict. In Carthage, internal factions debated the city's strategy. Some favored cautious compliance, focusing on trade and internal development, while others advocated for reasserting influence in North Africa and the Western Mediterranean. This divide weakened Carthage politically, leaving it vulnerable to external manipulation and internal dissent. Rome, ever vigilant, exploited this vulnerability. When Carthage responded to local threats or minor skirmishes, particularly against neighboring Numidian tribes allied with Rome, its actions were framed as violations of the treaty. Roman envoys demanded reparations and military limitations, escalating diplomatic tensions. Over time, these provocations created a climate in which war became increasingly inevitable. By 149 BCE, the stage was set. Carthage, limited in military strength but economically vibrant, stood under the shadow of Rome's overwhelming power. Rome, emboldened by decades of dominance and driven by political, economic, and strategic imperatives, prepared to eliminate Carthage as a potential rival once and for all. This tension, decades in the making, would soon erupt into the final and decisive conflict, the Third Punic War, which would determine the ultimate fate of Carthage and secure Rome's uncontested supremacy in the Mediterranean. By 149 BCE, the political climate in Rome had reached a fever pitch. Carthage, though weakened by the Second Punic War, had rebuilt its economy and continued to prosper through trade, which alarmed the hawkish faction of the Roman Senate. Influential senators, including Cato the Elder, famously ended every speech with the words, "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed. To Rome, this was not merely a warning, it was a declaration of intent. Preparations for war were meticulous and deliberate. The Senate allocated vast sums to rebuild legions, expand the navy, and ensure supply chains for a prolonged conflict. Unlike previous wars, this campaign would not be fought for glory or revenge alone, it was designed to eliminate Carthage as a rival permanently. Rome's generals meticulously planned troop movements, siege engines, and naval blockades to ensure maximum efficiency. Every legionary received detailed instructions, and veteran officers were selected for their experience in both offensive and defensive operations. Diplomatically, Rome worked to isolate Carthage by securing the loyalty of neighboring Numidian tribes. Massinissa, the king of Numidia and longtime Roman ally, provided cavalry support and intelligence, ensuring that Carthage's movements would be constantly monitored and its reinforcements limited. Rome's preparation reflected lessons learned from the Second Punic War: no surprise, no hesitation, and no mercy. The Republic intended not only to defeat Carthage but to destroy it utterly, ensuring it could never rise again. Soldiers, senators, and generals alike understood that this was a war of annihilation, a campaign that would reshape the Mediterranean world and cement Rome's supremacy for centuries to come. In the spring of 149 BCE, Rome's forces, commanded by the consul Manius Manilius and later by other appointed generals, arrived on the shores of Carthage. The city, heavily fortified with walls that had withstood Hannibal's campaigns decades earlier, appeared formidable but was underprepared for a siege of this scale. Roman engineers immediately began constructing siege ramps, battering rams, and towers, while the navy established a blockade to prevent supplies or reinforcements from reaching the city. Carthage, aware of the stakes, mobilized every available citizen and militia to defend its walls. Streets became armories, civilians, men, women, and even children, assisted in preparing defenses, filling sandbags, and reinforcing gates. The population knew that the survival of the city depended on their collective effort. Initial skirmishes tested the Roman approach. Carthaginian defenders, fighting with desperation and skill, inflicted significant casualties on the attacking legions. They used fire, projectiles, and clever counter-siege tactics to repel the initial assaults. Roman forces, however, adapted quickly. Engineers improved the placement of siege towers, developed protective coverings for advancing troops, and coordinated attacks to overwhelm the defenses systematically. The siege transformed the surrounding plains into a theater of engineering, strategy, and attrition. Rome's meticulous preparation and logistical superiority gradually turned the tide, while Carthage's defenders, though courageous, faced dwindling supplies and growing exhaustion. Civilians endured famine, disease, and the constant threat of bombardment, highlighting the brutal reality of siege warfare. The stage was set for an extended, deadly struggle where determination, ingenuity, and endurance would decide the fate of one of history's greatest cities. As the siege dragged into its first year, Carthage's situation became increasingly dire. Roman legions tightened the blockade, cutting off food, water, and reinforcements, while artillery relentlessly battered the city's outer walls. Inside, citizens endured hunger and disease, their resolve tested to the limits. Hannibal's legacy of military ingenuity lived on in the defenders' strategy, with city leaders using tunnels, hidden catapults, and surprise sorties to harass Roman forces. Yet the disparity in resources and manpower became painfully clear. Rome's ability to replace soldiers, maintain a steady supply of materials, and rotate troops contrasted sharply with Carthage's shrinking population and dwindling reserves. Despite this, Carthage refused to surrender, demonstrating remarkable resilience and a fierce commitment to survival. Women and children participated directly in defense, carrying supplies, reinforcing walls, and tending the wounded. Every street became a battleground, every gate a critical point of resistance. The city's leaders, facing both moral and strategic dilemmas, struggled to maintain unity while preventing panic and rebellion among the populace. The siege exemplified the total nature of Rome's warfare, an unrelenting combination of military might, engineering expertise, and psychological pressure aimed at eradicating opposition entirely. Carthage's defenders, despite their valor, were caught in a contest they could not ultimately win. The city would resist for 3 long years, but Rome's determination, tactical superiority, and relentless persistence made the eventual fall inevitable. The siege of Carthage had begun as a demonstration of Rome's resolve, but it would soon become the stage for one of the most decisive and devastating events in Mediterranean history. By 146 BCE, after 3 grueling years under Roman siege, Carthage had become a city under siege in the truest sense of the word. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion had taken a devastating toll on its population, yet the defenders continued to fight with a tenacity born of desperation. Roman forces, now led by Scipio Aemilianus, grandson of Scipio Africanus, meticulously prepared for a final, decisive assault. Scipio understood that the prolonged siege had weakened Carthage both physically and psychologically, but he also respected the courage of its citizens and warriors. The Romans constructed towering siege engines, battering rams, and catapults, coordinating their advance to target key sections of the city walls. Their approach combined engineering precision with relentless pressure. Roman legions moved systematically, slowly encroaching upon Carthage's defenses, cutting off any avenues for retreat or resupply. Inside the city, civilians and soldiers alike manned barricades and launched sorties to disrupt the Roman advance. Streets became chaotic battlefields, houses were converted into strongholds, and every alleyway became a potential trap for the attackers. Fire, smoke, and the clamor of combat enveloped the city as Roman troops pushed forward relentlessly. Despite their dire situation, the defenders of Carthage displayed tactical ingenuity. They repaired breaches in the walls overnight, conducted surprise attacks on Roman siege towers, and employed cunning traps to inflict maximum casualties. Yet, Rome's superior numbers, discipline, and sustained logistical support gradually overwhelmed these efforts. The city, though valiant, could not withstand the calculated and relentless pressure applied by a republic intent on total conquest. Every day, the noose tightened around Carthage, transforming hope into despair and resistance into a desperate struggle for survival. After intense fighting and relentless pressure, Roman forces breached Carthage's defenses. Once inside, the city became a maelstrom of chaos, violence, and destruction. The Romans engaged in street-by-street combat, facing pockets of resistance from both trained soldiers and armed civilians. Buildings were set ablaze, and smoke choked the streets as fires spread uncontrollably, consuming homes, marketplaces, and temples alike. Citizens who survived the initial breach faced execution or enslavement, while the city's defenders fought to their last breath. Scipio Aemilianus, careful to maintain discipline among his troops, ensured that the destruction was total but organized, targeting strategic centers of resistance while systematically subduing civilian areas. The city's fortifications, once considered nearly impregnable, were dismantled, and Roman engineers leveled walls, towers, and gates. Over the course of several days, Carthage's infrastructure was reduced to ruins. Archaeological accounts and historical sources describe streets littered with debris, temples toppled, and fortresses razed. The once proud metropolis, a hub of commerce, culture, and military innovation, ceased to exist as a functional entity. Every surviving building became a testament to the relentless efficiency of Roman conquest. The destruction was not merely physical, it was symbolic. Rome intended to eliminate Carthage as a political, military, and cultural rival, ensuring that no future leader could restore its former glory. The fall of Carthage marked the end of the Punic Wars and signaled Rome's unchallenged supremacy in the western Mediterranean. The aftermath of Carthage's destruction was catastrophic for the region. Survivors were enslaved or scattered, lands were absorbed into the growing Roman provinces, and the memory of Carthage's power survived only in legend and cautionary tales. Rome, having eliminated its most formidable rival, solidified its dominance across the western Mediterranean. Politically, the Republic expanded control over North Africa, integrating the territory into a network of provinces governed by Roman administrators. Economically, the former Carthaginian trade networks were absorbed into Rome's growing commercial system, enhancing the Republic's wealth and reinforcing its naval and military superiority. The destruction of Carthage also sent a clear message to other Mediterranean powers: Rome would not tolerate rivals or challenges to its supremacy. Culturally, the annihilation of Carthage became a cautionary tale in Roman consciousness, a demonstration of the consequences of defiance, resilience, and military audacity in the face of a determined superpower. Hannibal's legacy, though extinguished within Carthage itself, lived on as a symbol of brilliant strategy and courage against overwhelming odds. For centuries, military scholars studied his tactics, from the crossing of the Alps to the victories in Italy, and his campaigns influenced the strategies of countless generals, including Roman commanders, medieval leaders, and modern strategists. The fall of Carthage also shaped Rome's approach to empire building: thorough, strategic, and unyielding in the face of opposition. Rome's complete victory over Carthage not only secured its political and military dominance but also set a precedent for the creation of an empire built on the integration of conquered territories, disciplined military forces, and the elimination of potential rivals. The Punic Wars, culminating in Carthage's destruction, thus represented a turning point in history, an epoch that marked the rise of Rome as the unchallenged master of the Mediterranean world. After the fall of Carthage, Rome turned its attention to consolidating control over its remaining and newly acquired territories. Sicily, the first Roman province established during the First Punic War, had long been a critical center for grain production and trade. Its fertile plain supplied Rome's growing population, and its strategic location allowed control over the shipping lanes of the central Mediterranean. Following Carthage's defeat, Rome reinforced its hold on Sicily, stationing legions to maintain order, build infrastructure, and secure coastal ports. Roman administrators integrated the local elite into the provincial governance system, ensuring loyalty while gradually Romanizing the population through law, commerce, and culture. In Spain, Roman expansion had been ongoing since the Second Punic War under Scipio Africanus. After Hannibal's campaigns, much of Spain's southern territories were already under Roman control, but resistance persisted in the north among tribes such as the Lusitanians and Celtiberians. The Roman approach combined military campaigns with diplomacy. Forts were established to secure key trade routes, roads were built to facilitate troop movements, and alliances were forged with compliant tribes. By doing so, Rome not only extended its territorial reach but also secured the natural resources of Spain, including silver mines and fertile land, which would fuel further expansion and finance military campaigns. The lessons from the Punic Wars, discipline, strategic patience, and logistical planning, were applied rigorously in these regions. Rome's legions were not only instruments of conquest but also tools for infrastructure, administration, and integration, ensuring that newly acquired territories could contribute sustainably to the Republic's wealth and power. The consolidation of Sicily and Spain laid the foundation for Rome's transformation from a regional Italian power into a dominant Mediterranean empire, capable of sustaining prolonged campaigns and maintaining influence across vast distances. With the western Mediterranean secured, Rome began projecting its power into the eastern Mediterranean. The Hellenistic kingdoms, Macedon, Pergamon, and the remnants of the Seleucid Empire, had long been influential, wealthy, and militarily capable. Roman intervention in the region initially arose from a combination of diplomacy, treaty obligations, and response to appeals for assistance from Greek city-states threatened by Macedonian expansion. During the Macedonian Wars, 215 to 148 BCE, Rome deployed legions across the Greek mainland, engaging in campaigns that combined tactical ingenuity with strategic coordination. Battles such as Cynocephaly, 197 BCE, demonstrated the effectiveness of the flexible Roman manipular system against the traditional phalanx formations of Macedon. These engagements allowed Rome to assert control over critical regions, impose political settlements favorable to its interests, and establish client states that would serve as buffers against potential threats. Economically, Rome capitalized on the wealth of the Hellenistic world, securing access to Mediterranean trade networks, ports, and resources such as timber, grain, and silver. Diplomatically, Rome forged alliances with Greek city-states and rulers, balancing coercion with cooperation to maintain stability while projecting influence. Roman governors and administrators worked to integrate Greek territories into the Republic's orbit, preserving local traditions while enforcing Roman laws and tribute obligations. This expansion into Greece marked a significant evolution in Rome's strategy. The Republic was no longer a power confined to Italy and the Western Mediterranean but had begun to establish political, military, and economic dominance across the entire Mediterranean basin. The Roman presence in the east also served as a deterrent against any resurgence of Carthaginian influence and positioned the Republic as the ultimate arbiter in regional conflicts, demonstrating both the reach and sophistication of Roman power. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome's rise as a Mediterranean superpower was unmistakable. With Carthage annihilated, Sicily fully secured, Spain under firm control, and Greece integrated into its sphere of influence, the Republic commanded unparalleled political, military, and economic authority. Rome's legions had become professional, disciplined, and versatile, capable of sustained campaigns across continents and against diverse opponents. The navy, expanded and refined after the Punic Wars, ensured dominance of the seas, enabling rapid troop movements, logistical support, and enforcement of trade regulations. Politically, the Senate exercised far-reaching influence over conquered territories, utilizing a combination of direct administration, client kings, and alliances to maintain order and prevent uprisings. Economically, the wealth derived from tributes, conquered resources, and trade revenues allowed Rome to fund further military campaigns, build infrastructure, and support a growing urban population. Culturally, Rome began to assimilate elements of Greek civilization, philosophy, architecture, and art, while imposing Latin as the administrative language of governance, law, and commerce. The combination of military dominance, strategic diplomacy, economic integration, and cultural influence created a system that was resilient, adaptive, and capable of sustained expansion. Rome's hegemony over the Mediterranean was not merely territorial, it was structural, embedding the Republic's power in the political, economic, and cultural fabric of the region. By securing key territories, neutralizing rivals, and establishing a network of allies and provinces, Rome ensured that its supremacy would endure. The Republic's evolution from a regional power into a Mediterranean superpower set the stage for centuries of influence, laying the foundations for the empire that would dominate the ancient world. Rome had survived near catastrophe, learned from its enemies, and emerged as the definitive arbiter of Mediterranean politics, trade, and war. The Punic Wars had been an unparalleled crucible for the Roman military. Hannibal's audacity in the Second Punic War, particularly his crossing of the Alps and successive victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae, had exposed both the strengths and vulnerabilities of Rome's traditional army structure. Prior to these conflicts, the Roman legions relied heavily on rigid formations of heavy infantry, primarily the manipular system, organized in centuries and maniples with strict adherence to discipline. While effective in many contexts, Hannibal's tactical ingenuity, emphasizing ambushes, flanking maneuvers, and psychological warfare, highlighted the need for flexibility, adaptability, and coordination across multiple units. The near annihilation of Roman forces at Cannae in 216 BCE was a shock to the Republic, demonstrating that numbers and discipline alone were insufficient against a genius commander exploiting terrain, timing, and the enemy's overconfidence. Following the war, Roman generals, particularly Scipio Africanus, undertook a systematic review of tactics, logistics, and training. The legions were restructured to increase cohesion and adaptability, allowing units to respond more effectively to unexpected threats. Training emphasized versatility, with soldiers learning not only to fight in formation but also to conduct skirmishes, defensive operations, and rapid maneuvers in diverse terrains. Logistics, previously a source of vulnerability, were overhauled. Supply lines were improved, standardized equipment was introduced, and strategic reserves were maintained to ensure that legions could sustain campaigns over long distances without risk of starvation or attrition. The Punic Wars thus served as a catalyst for Rome's transformation from a regional power with conventional forces into a sophisticated military machine capable of projecting power across continents and seas. Following the Punic Wars, Rome's military underwent profound tactical innovations and professionalization. The legions were trained to operate with combined arms, integrating heavy infantry, skirmishers, cavalry, and engineers to create a versatile and adaptive fighting force. Roman cavalry, previously overshadowed by the heavy infantry, was expanded and trained for both reconnaissance and decisive flanking maneuvers. Engineers became integral to campaigns, constructing siege engines, fortifications, roads, and bridges that allowed armies to maintain momentum and control over strategic terrain. The manipular system evolved into a more flexible formation capable of responding dynamically to threats, with cohorts able to operate independently while maintaining cohesion with the larger legion. Standardization of equipment, shields, helmets, pila, and gladii, ensured that soldiers could replace lost gear quickly, maintain uniformity, and fight effectively in coordinated units. Furthermore, Rome implemented merit-based promotion within the legions, allowing soldiers demonstrating courage, strategic insight, and leadership to rise in rank. This professionalization increased morale, improved tactical efficiency, and created a corps of experienced officers capable of independent decision-making in the field. Campaigns in Spain, Greece, and later in North Africa after Carthage's fall tested these reforms, proving their efficacy. Roman forces could now confront diverse enemies, ranging from guerrilla-style tribal warriors in Spain to phalanx-based Hellenistic armies in Greece, and adapt to the specific challenges posed by terrain, enemy strategy, and environmental conditions. The evolution of Roman military tactics after the Punic Wars reflected not only lessons learned from past mistakes but also a forward-looking approach to empire building, where innovation, adaptability, and discipline ensured sustained dominance. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome had developed a comprehensive strategic doctrine that combined tactical flexibility, logistical mastery, and psychological understanding of warfare. The Republic's military was no longer a reactive force, it became a proactive instrument of expansion, capable of initiating campaigns, exploiting enemy weaknesses, and sustaining long-term sieges. Roman commanders emphasized intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, and psychological pressure, often using strategic threats to force compliance or surrender before battles were fought. The integration of political objectives with military campaigns was a hallmark of this doctrine. Victories were not measured solely in battlefield success but also in the consolidation of territory, control of trade, and the weakening of rival powers. The professionalized legions became the backbone of Rome's expansionist strategy, ensuring that the Republic could maintain order, secure borders, and project influence across vast regions. This approach created a durable system capable of handling diverse enemies, from disciplined Hellenistic armies to tribal insurgents, while simultaneously managing conquered populations. The military reforms following the Punic Wars had consequences far beyond immediate campaigns. They facilitated the conquest of Carthage, the integration of Spain, Sicily, and Greece into Rome's sphere, and the ability to respond to emerging threats in North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. Strategically, Rome had become a superpower not merely through brute force but through calculated preparation, discipline, innovation, and foresight. These reforms laid the groundwork for the transformation of the Republic into an empire, creating a military legacy that would influence not only contemporary adversaries but also future generations of commanders. Hannibal's brilliance had forced Rome to evolve, and through adaptation and reform, the Republic had emerged stronger, more disciplined, and unmatched in its ability to wage both war and empire. The conclusion of the Punic Wars transformed Rome from a regional power into a dominant Mediterranean economic hub. The acquisition of Carthaginian territories, control over Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and parts of Spain, and access to the rich resources of the Hellenistic world created unprecedented wealth for the Republic. Large estates, often worked by enslaved populations captured in Carthage and Spain, became central to agricultural production, particularly in grain, olive oil, and wine, fueling both local consumption and exports to distant provinces. Roman merchants and aristocrats amassed fortunes through trade, speculation, and tribute, while infrastructure improvements, roads, ports, and aqueducts, facilitated movement of goods and military supplies. The influx of wealth, however, also created social imbalances. Landless citizens, who had previously served in local militias, migrated to cities seeking work, swelling Rome's urban population and contributing to overcrowding and rising demand for public provisions. The Senate responded by expanding grain distributions and sponsoring public works to stabilize society. Wealthier classes invested in villas, art, and cultural patronage, blending Roman practicality with Hellenistic luxury. The economic transformation extended beyond agriculture. Commerce, finance, and craftsmanship expanded to meet the needs of Rome's growing territories. Markets thrived, ports buzzed with activity, and merchant fleets transported goods across the Mediterranean. The prosperity generated by conquest allowed Rome not only to sustain its military might but also to invest in long-term civic projects, public entertainment, and the consolidation of political power. Yet, alongside this boom, the seeds of social tension were sown. Wealth disparities, reliance on slave labor, and concentration of land ownership created friction between classes, shaping the political and cultural debates that would dominate the late Republic. Rome's military victories and territorial expansion were matched by a cultural transformation driven by contact with Carthage, Greece, and the Hellenistic world. The influx of Greek scholars, philosophers, architects, and artists introduced Romans to new ideas in philosophy, literature, and the arts. Wealthy elites began sponsoring the construction of theaters, temples, and libraries modeled on Hellenistic designs, blending Roman engineering with Greek aesthetics. Education shifted as Roman youth were tutored in rhetoric, philosophy, and history, adopting Greek modes of thought while maintaining Roman civic ideals. Religious practices also evolved. While Roman traditional deities remained central, foreign gods and rituals, particularly from the East, were incorporated into the pantheon, reflecting Rome's openness to syncretism while asserting dominance over conquered peoples. This process of cultural assimilation, often referred to as Hellenization, was selective and practical. It borrowed what enhanced prestige, intellectual sophistication, and social cohesion while reinforcing Roman identity and authority. Public life, entertainment, and political discourse became increasingly influenced by Greek models, including drama, oratory, and civic debate. Festivals, games, and spectacles grew in scale and complexity, serving both as entertainment and as tools of political propaganda, demonstrating Rome's wealth, power, and cultural sophistication to citizens and subjects alike. This cultural synthesis created a Roman society that was simultaneously traditional and cosmopolitan, grounded in civic duty yet enriched by the knowledge and artistic achievements of the broader Mediterranean world. The transformation of Rome's cultural landscape after the Punic Wars laid the foundation for its enduring influence, shaping literature, philosophy, and art for centuries. The economic and cultural transformations brought profound political consequences. Wealth concentration and social mobility became central issues in Roman politics, creating tensions between the Senate's elite families and the broader citizenry. Former soldiers, displaced by land redistribution and the growth of large estates, demanded land reforms and support, while urban populations relied increasingly on grain doles and public entertainment for survival and loyalty. Politicians, aware of these pressures, leveraged both patronage and populist measures to secure influence, setting precedents for the political struggles that would dominate the late Republic. The military's evolving role also affected politics. Generals who commanded legions in distant provinces gained wealth, loyalty from troops, and personal prestige, sometimes rivaling the authority of the Senate itself. This concentration of power in military leaders, combined with economic disparities and cultural shifts, created a volatile political environment. At the same time, Rome's governance of conquered territories introduced administrative innovations. Provinces were overseen by magistrates, and taxation systems were refined to balance revenue extraction with local stability. The integration of foreign elites into Roman political and social systems helped mitigate rebellion, yet dependence on conquest-generated wealth created vulnerabilities. Rome's prosperity and stability were increasingly tied to continued expansion and successful military campaigns. These social and political dynamics, emerging in the aftermath of the Punic Wars, foreshadowed future conflicts, power struggles, and reforms that would define the Republic's trajectory. The period marked both the consolidation of Rome's dominance and the emergence of challenges that would test its institutions, military structures, and cultural cohesion in the centuries to come. By the late 2nd century BCE, Rome had solidified its control across the Mediterranean, combining military might, economic dominance, and cultural integration to establish a foundation for long-term hegemony. The Republic now commanded territory stretching from the Italian peninsula to Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, North Africa, Spain, and Greece. Strategic fortifications and roads enabled the rapid deployment of legions, while a disciplined and professional army ensured that local uprisings or external threats could be swiftly suppressed. Economically, Rome harnessed the wealth of conquered lands to fund public works, military campaigns, and urban expansion. Grain shipments from Sicily and North Africa supplied cities, mines from Spain and Greece provided precious metals, and trade across the Mediterranean enriched both the elite and the urban populace. Politically, the Senate maintained authority through a combination of client states, local magistrates, and strategic colonies. Local elites were co-opted into the Roman system, securing loyalty while reducing resistance. Diplomacy, as much as military conquest, played a crucial role. Rome balanced coercion with alliances, ensuring that former enemies were integrated as dependent allies, bound by treaties, military obligations, and economic interdependence. Socially, this consolidation produced both cohesion and tension. Urban centers flourished, but rural populations experienced land dispossession and migration pressures. The military's increasing prestige created new power dynamics, with generals commanding loyalty from soldiers independent of Rome's traditional political structures. Collectively, these factors positioned Rome as a superpower whose dominance rested on integrated systems of military, economic, and political control, a prelude to the transition from republic to empire. Rome's dominance was not the result of chance, it was the product of deliberate strategic doctrine. The Republic's leaders learned from the Punic Wars, observing the catastrophic consequences of underestimating Hannibal and the value of disciplined, flexible forces capable of rapid adaptation. Rome's legions were stationed in key provinces, ready to respond to rebellions, tribal incursions, or rival powers seeking to challenge the Republic. Naval supremacy ensured control of trade routes, troop movements, and coastal defense, enabling Rome to project power far beyond its Italian heartland. Administratively, provinces were structured to generate revenue while maintaining security. Taxation systems were designed to extract resources without triggering rebellion, and legal frameworks were extended to integrate conquered peoples, providing limited autonomy while asserting Roman authority. Strategically, Rome sought to preempt threats. Diplomatic interventions, military alliances, and surveillance of rival powers created a buffer against potential challengers. Carthage, annihilated decades earlier, served as a cautionary tale: no rival would be allowed to rise unchecked. Economically, the Republic encouraged development and trade within its territories, ensuring a stable flow of resources that supported both civilian life and military endeavors. Cultural integration reinforced strategic control, with education, religion, and civic rituals used to create a shared identity and promote loyalty. By combining tactical innovation, administrative oversight, economic management, and cultural influence, Rome achieved a level of strategic dominance unprecedented in the ancient world, a dominance that would serve as the foundation for its transformation from a republic into a Mediterranean empire. The late Republic marked a period in which Rome's dominance created conditions for political and structural transformation. While military victories, economic wealth, and cultural assimilation reinforced Roman power, they also introduced new pressures that challenged the traditional republican system. Generals commanding large, professional legions gained personal loyalty from troops, which could rival the authority of the Senate. Wealth accumulation among elites created social disparities, fostering populist movements and political conflicts. Governance of distant provinces required efficient administration, creating professional bureaucracies that operated semi-independently from Rome. These developments, while reinforcing Rome's dominance, also revealed the limitations of republican mechanisms in managing a vast and complex Mediterranean hegemony. As Rome consolidated territories, integrated trade networks, and maintained overwhelming military superiority, the seeds of imperial governance were sown. The Republic's success relied not only on conquest but on the sustained ability to administer, defend, and unify a diverse and sprawling network of provinces and allies. Military discipline, strategic planning, economic integration, and cultural influence had created an unprecedented system of control, one that could be expanded further under centralized authority. The lessons of the Punic Wars, the destruction of Carthage, and the campaigns across Greece and Spain demonstrated that Rome's future depended not merely on battlefield victories but on the capacity to transform conquest into enduring dominion. By the early 1st century BCE, the structures, strategies, and policies developed during this era had set the stage for Rome's transition from republic to empire, a period that would redefine governance, warfare, and culture across the ancient world, ensuring Rome's place as the preeminent power of the Mediterranean for centuries to come. The Punic Wars left an indelible mark on military history, shaping Rome's approach to warfare for centuries. The battles against Carthage, particularly Hannibal's campaigns, exposed both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the Roman army, prompting reforms that would define the legions for generations. Tactical flexibility, disciplined training, and combined arms coordination became hallmarks of Roman strategy, ensuring that armies could operate effectively in diverse terrains and against varied adversaries. The wars emphasized the importance of intelligence, logistics, and preemptive planning. Commanders learned that terrain, morale, and timing could outweigh numerical advantage, lessons internalized during Hannibal's audacious operations in Italy. Additionally, the construction of roads, fortifications, and naval bases during these campaigns illustrated the integration of engineering and strategy as a force multiplier. Future military leaders, from Roman generals to modern strategists, studied these campaigns to understand siegecraft, battlefield maneuvering, and long-term operational planning. The annihilation of Carthage in the Third Punic War exemplified total war, demonstrating the use of military, economic, and psychological pressure to achieve decisive objectives. Rome's ability to combine strategic foresight, tactical innovation, and logistical support created a template for imperial warfare that would allow the Republic, and later the Empire, to dominate the Mediterranean and beyond. The Punic Wars also catalyzed profound political and cultural transformations within Rome. The immense influx of wealth from Carthaginian territories and other conquered lands reshaped the economic structure, empowering the elite while challenging the traditional republican balance. Social tensions arose as landless citizens, displaced by the expansion of latifundia, migrated to cities, creating urban pressures that necessitated grain distributions and public spectacles. Politically, the increasing power of military commanders with personal loyalty from legions foreshadowed the eventual shift from republican governance toward autocratic leadership. Cultural assimilation accompanied military conquest. Rome absorbed Hellenistic art, philosophy, religion, and education, selectively integrating these elements to enrich civic life while maintaining Roman identity. Religious syncretism, monumental architecture, and literary patronage reflected both power and prestige. The blending of Greek, Carthaginian, and Roman traditions produced a society that valued civic duty, intellectual pursuit, and martial excellence, establishing foundations for centuries of cultural influence. Festivals, public forums, and entertainment reinforced civic identity while demonstrating Rome's ability to use culture as a tool of political cohesion. Through these processes, the Punic Wars not only transformed Rome militarily but also socially, politically, and culturally, laying the groundwork for the empire's long-lasting influence. Ultimately, the Punic Wars reshaped the Mediterranean world, establishing a new geopolitical order dominated by Rome. Carthage's destruction removed Rome's principal rival in the west, enabling unchallenged control over trade, resources, and strategic territories. The Republic's expansion into Spain, Sicily, North Africa, and Greece integrated diverse cultures and economies, creating a network of provinces and client states that contributed to long-term stability and prosperity. Rome's approach to governance, combining military oversight, diplomatic alliances, and cultural integration, became a model of imperial administration, influencing subsequent empires across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. The wars also left a lasting intellectual legacy. Historians, philosophers, and military theorists analyzed Roman strategies, Hannibal's campaigns, and the diplomatic maneuvers of both sides to draw lessons in statecraft, resilience, and human ambition. The psychological impact of the Punic Wars, particularly the narrative of Hannibal as a genius adversary, contributed to a Roman identity defined by resilience, adaptability, and ultimate victory. In sum, the Punic Wars were not merely a series of conflicts, they were a transformative epoch that forged Rome's military doctrines, political institutions, economic systems, and cultural identity. The Republic's triumph over Carthage set the stage for the Roman Empire, shaping Mediterranean history and leaving an enduring legacy that continues to inform our understanding of power, strategy, and civilization. The echoes of these wars, military, cultural, and political, resonate to this day, testifying to Rome's remarkable ability to learn, adapt, and dominate in a world defined by conflict, ambition, and resilience. And that concludes our journey through the Punic Wars. Today, we witness the rise of Rome, the genius of Hannibal, the brutal sieges, the ultimate destruction of Carthage, and the lasting changes that transformed the Mediterranean world forever. The moral of the story: strategy, courage, and adaptability can challenge even the mightiest powers, but perseverance, discipline, and innovation can turn the tide, shaping civilizations for centuries. History isn't just about battles, it's about understanding how human decisions, ambitions, and resilience leave their mark on the world. If you enjoyed this epic journey, make sure to subscribe to History Teller YT, hit the bell icon, and join us again for more incredible stories from the past. From legendary wars to unsolved mysteries and hidden tales of civilization, there's always more to explore. Remember, history is alive, and here on History Teller YT, it's waiting for you. See you in the next adventure.